are spending a lot of different times, or like a lot of time in like different programs, and like I feel like I'm also spending a lot of time in different programs, and I feel like it's becoming more and more common that as technology advances, as the world gets more and more competitive, let's say, like people are starting to need to like learn more and more skills, more and more tasks in different programs. So I feel like this role of like a generalist is becoming more and more in demand because people are just learning so much more. The data is, like increasing more and more on the internet of how to do certain things, like learning resources are increasing. So people are expanding their skill set to a level where in some ways the software is being upgraded and like evolved, but the hardware is staying the same. And I feel like with the Create, it's really kind of putting together all of these things where it's like, what if you had a device that actually allows you to expand how you interact with all of these programs at the same time? Like, kind of feels to me like it's really that tool for like the 21st century like generalist, where it's like, oh, you do music production, oh, you do 3D design, oh, you do video editing. Like, you can have this one product and it kind of covers the entire spectrum of your skill set.
What I thought was so fascinating when we started looking deeper into this is that the input methods that are being used between all of these fields are actually really, really similar.
Right.
When we look at what color grading needs, or what we use for our general web browsing behavior, or as an Excel sheet, let's say in financial controlling, or what we need for video editing, the type of input that we use for these things is really simple, because it all had to be done with a certain constrained device set. But the type of input that we are used to is also very, very standardized. So when we provide a better input tool for this kind of input type, it immediately is applicable to various fields. And I think that was really one of the main triggers where we said, okay, this actually is broadly applicable, not just by chance, but because these fields are designed to use these certain inputs in a specific way.
When we were making the videos for the comparison content piece, we were kind of thrown aback by like the weirdness of not having to move your hand at all when selecting something, like with a mouse pointer, like having this complete freedom to just kind of have your hands like sitting in a certain way. It kind of unlocked this kind of hidden bandwidth in our brain that's like, wow, now I actually have to try and keep up with the device, and the device doesn't have to keep up with me. It's like we noticed like how quickly you have to kind of think to achieve the same sort of results than like you would have, for example, like on a traditional setup.
The first time I did this, I absolutely hated it.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I was the slow part now.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The first time I used it, it felt like, I don't have the time to think about this while I move my hand to my mouse. Oh
exactly,
no.
Yeah.
What's the next thing I wanted to do? Like suddenly the bottleneck was no longer the computer side or the input side of things, but my thinking process.
Yes, yeah.
I was like, oh no, I'm the slow one now. It was really funny, because that was the first time I noticed how much time I actually lose with these things.
Yeah.
Because it gave me so much time to just slowly consider. It's so absurd how massive the impact of that is, that you immediately notice that your things go so much faster that you now don't even have enough time to think about the next step anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Really interesting.
It's also, to me, it's a pointer to like how much potential like we still have to unlock. Like, if, for example, like we know, like if this is kind of like the next step in like computer interaction hardware, then like obviously we've heard, like people like Elon Musk talk about, like brain like chip interfaces, how, we have to like minimize the bandwidth between, the information stream that we output and input. I feel like this is kind of a step towards that in a hardware perspective, where it's like, okay, we're not doing this kind of like interaction in like this digital latent space, but it's more so of like, tactile interaction. And it's just interesting to me how like it actually does prove that there is still some ground to be made in terms of how efficient and how quick we can be in terms of interacting with things on a hardware level.
Yeah, like the entire story on the limitation of how we convey information is really, really curious. Because we contextualize how we exchange information in the manner in which we output it. So in speech, we have a very different speed from reading or from typing, purely because of the way we do it, the mechanical way of which we do it. So when people count and they can use their hands, they count at a different speed from when they can't use their hands. And all of these kinds of, how the motoric part of it influences how you think about a process. And when we think about a process of selecting something, then that thought process involves moving our hand to the device that moves the pointer.
Right.
That is a fundamental part of how we think about selecting an item. But the fact that we now can skip that entire process from what we have to think about, it not only changes the motorical part of executing, but it changes the thought of how do I do this thing. In the most simple task, web browsing, we see some really interesting results there when people usually use specific hotkey combinations to switch between tabs or to move tabs around. You can give people very simple task sheets of, hey, can you execute these things? And then the ways they do it is the main factor in how quickly they can get these things done. And their thought process is tuned towards the executional aspect of doing that. So let's say open an app, move that tab to your 5th tab, pin it to the bar, and then switch to your 1st tab before moving 3 tabs left. For most people, this is a task they switch to their mouse, right? They will start moving tabs around by clicking them and dragging them. Some people will know the hotkey combination for this and will do it via hotkey combinations.
Right.
But I can tell you those hotkey combinations in a quick series are not fun and involve some serious finger gymnastics. But by having a different input device, you can suddenly do this with, just turning a dial and pressing a single key and keeping turning the dial.
Right.
It's a very different way of how you have to think about a task and how you contextualize a task. There will be a learning curve. That's the reality of things.
That is,
Hopefully curve here isn't a learning curve of having to change something that you wanted, like that you did exactly the same way before and you just want to do the same thing again, which is what we have seen very frequently on, changing keyboards or any other item of habit, but where you actually get a new option. So you're not changing to the same thing before, but you are changing to a new process. And generally that process is a lot more rewarding because you don't feel like you're stuck or trying to get to the same outcome again.
Right.
You're trying to get to a different outcome. So I think that's fundamentally what we want to achieve here, a different outcome. I'm super looking forward to professionals and experts in every field getting their hands on this and showing us what they can do. Because I think there's one aspect that I'm even more curious about than efficiency, and that is the areas where the change is categorical. So we can measure performance of people in doing the same task faster. But there are some things where you basically where a task was either so inefficient or so difficult to execute that most people would just not do it at all and use a different solution to try to get the same result. Those are the kinds of tasks where I'm even more curious on what kind of things can we now do that were just outright not beforehand. And that's where I'm most curious where people will take this device.
Yeah, it's a nod to like the emergent features and properties of this sort of device where it's like, you have so many different possibilities and combinations that like we don't even know some of the things that people could be doing with this. Like that's the interesting and like really exciting part. It's like it's this super complex product, but then obviously like we know like from complexity arises like emergent properties.
Already when we hear people share in our community what their jobs are and what they intuitively already saw, I need this for that task. There was someone who posted in our group that they work in neurology and that they could use MRI images because they're also made as layers, and they could use Tune to scroll through these MRI images. And that is a use case I would have never thought of. But it makes total sense. And combining that particular functionality of what you would get with a keyboard suddenly opens up a whole new field that we never even considered. And I bet there are hundreds more like this.